So thank you all for staying with us. So we're reaching the last talk of the second part of our day. So delighted to be welcoming Tyler here today, coming to us from a different time zone from the US. So it's a little earlier in the day, so he'll have plenty of time to celebrate with some traditional Halloween games that we heard in Clodagh's wonderful talk. But before I get onto the introduction of Tyler, I want to firstly congratulate him on his recent accolade. Tyler has been awarded a Dark Sky Defender Award this year. And I think sometimes these awards can kind of roll off the tongue, but I think it's really important to kind of highlight what this award means. And I've taken the wording from the International Dark Sky Association's website about I think it highlights the amount of work that these Dark Sky Defender awardees do to receive the accolade. So each year, the IDA, or the International Dark Sky Association, recognizes and celebrates incredible achievements of individuals and groups who are committed to our mission to preserve the night. The award is given to individuals and organizations in recognition of their exceptional efforts to promote and advance the mission and programs of the IDA by promoting quality outdoor lighting to reduce light pollution and its environmental impacts. So I wish we could do a virtual applause for Tyler, but I'm sure all of you that are listening will recognize what an accolade that is. And I hope Tyler doesn't mind me mentioning that there's actually two Irish students that have also received this award this year, Sophie McQuillan and Roisin Grant. And thanks to Friedel Pass, who brought to our attention those two Irish students. And you can read more about the Dark Sky Defender Awards on the IDA's website, darksky.org. So I just wanted to start the introduction with that really great news. So Dr. Tyler Nordgren is a professional astronomer, and he spent over 10 years working with the US National Park Service. And he's been working in astronomy education and outreach, which I'm very passionate about education and outreach, as I work with the National Parks and Wildlife Service here in Ireland. So I really appreciate the work that he does. He's also written 2 books about the night skies, and he's a former member of the board of directors of the IDA. Tyler's also an artist, and he creates beautiful vintage style posters. And I'm really looking forward to seeing his talk, because I think he's a special poster to show us towards the end of the talk. And he's actually coined the phrase, half the park is after dark. And I think that phrase really invites visitors to parks and park managers to reimagine these protected places like national parks and these protected landscapes, to look at them in a different way and to see them as, you know, the land below and the sky above, and that both are really worth protecting. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Tyler's talk, how he links the two creative disciplines of science and art. And yeah, so without further ado, I'll hand you over to Tyler. Thank you, Tyler.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. I'm so looking forward to this. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. Oh. So as you mentioned, I do a lot of work with national parks in the United States. And it's something I've been passionate about for my entire life. I grew up in Alaska, where I had a glacier down the street and I could see the aurora overhead. But by summer, when the Milky Way is out and most people see it, well, that was the time of year where the sun never really set. And so I never got to see the Milky Way as a child. And so I still remember what it's like to see the sky. And as you just mentioned, we talk about science and art, these two different disciplines, but really they go hand in hand. And one of the the results that's come out in just the last year, which I think is a wonderful example of this, is an analysis of the Lascaux caves in France. These amazingly beautiful representations of animals from around 16,500 BCE. Well, recently, the hypothesis is these cave paintings that have been well known and rightfully famous for decades may in fact be a map of the heavens, the constellation of Orion, the belt, the Hyades, which is the head of Taurus, the bull, and the Pleiades, the seven sisters. And so, in fact, when you go and you see this cave painting, you may in fact be seeing the very first planetarium. And when you think about astronomy and art, this study of nature, when you communicate with that or record it for future generations, that recording is in itself art. And I show here an overhang in Sandstone Canyon in the southwestern United States, Chaco Culture National Historical Park, that may in fact be a representation of a supernova that was observed back in 1066, and possibly Halley's Comet as well. And this idea of art and science, where did they come about? Well, in fact, they may have come about together. When you talk about the evolution of not just human beings, our physical selves, but our minds, this ability to say, do science, of knowing that if you make an observation, if this happens, then this must occur. Or artwork, that this daub of color of paint is a bull. These two abilities are very abstract in nature and may have required our own minds to develop this ability to see in metaphor and analogy. And so, in fact, some of the very first evidence for science may have come about at the very first instance of art as well. And there's a wonderful example from really much more recently, which has to do with our first telescopic observations of the sky. We all think of Galileo pointing the telescope at the moon in November of 1609. In fact, in 2009, we celebrated the International Year of Astronomy to celebrate this. But in fact, Galileo was not the first person to point his telescope at the moon. Thomas Harriot, an English astronomer, did that in the summer of 1609 and even made a drawing. But as you can see here on the left, that drawing, while strictly speaking is accurate, you can draw no real conclusions from it. In fact, he didn't draw any conclusions about it from what he saw. Whereas on the right, we have Galileo's drawing. And when you think about looking through a telescope, you look through with one eye. You take your binocular vision that gives you a sense of depth and 3 dimensions, and you close one eye to look through a telescope, and 3 dimensions are rendered in 2. And you have to construct, what am I actually seeing? Well, Galileo, he was born and raised and working in Florence, Italy, in the heart of the Renaissance, where people were representing 3-dimensional life in 2 dimensions. He even briefly taught artists the skills of chiaroscuro, which is the interplay of light and shadow on 3-dimensional surfaces. So when he first looked through the telescope, he was able to make this connection that there were the lights and dark figures he was seeing were mountains sticking out at us, or craters falling inward, and that you had light falling on this 3-dimensional world, a world just like the Earth. In fact, it was revolutionary. It changed the moon from an ethereal place to a place very much like the Earth. And you can even see this for the next several hundred years before the invention of cameras, that whenever astronomers looked through their telescopes, they had to draw what it was they saw. And so a wonderful example from the United States is Percival Lowell around the beginning of the 20th century looking at Mars. Particularly appropriate right now as Mars is in opposition, and so is wonderfully bright in the night sky right now. Well, when Percival Lowell looked through his telescope and he drew what he saw in those moments of clarity, what he saw were canals. Now, this comes from Schiaparelli in Italy, who would call these features canali or channels. Percival Lowell misinterpreted them as canals, which implies something artificial. And by claiming that these were artificial objects, which is what they appeared to him through his telescope, suddenly it was natural to conclude that Mars was inhabited, perhaps by an ancient civilization, one that was perhaps far more technologically advanced than we were. And an entire industry arose over what must therefore be going on Mars. And even into the 1950s, when artist Chesley Bonestell in 1949 would portray Mars, he would portray these canals. It was in the popular mindset. H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, Orson Welles in the radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, all of these imagined Mars as a place alive. Maybe not with super intelligent beings, but at the very least with some form of low vegetation. Imagine living in a world today where we would be disappointed in discovering a planet that only had a low form of vegetation covering its surface. But that is what we thought Mars was. Well, Chesley Bonestell, in his paintings, especially those that came out in 1952, Conquest of Space, created this entire idea of what space exploration might be like. And those scientists and engineers that subsequently went on to work for NASA in the first spacecraft missions and the planning for the exploration of space with human beings had his paintings in mind. Everything from space stations to a space shuttle with wings came about from Chesley Bonestell in those days. Now, as it turns out, we have gone to Mars. There are no canals. There is no low form of vegetation. Here is a photograph from the Curiosity rover currently trundling about on Mars within Gale Crater. And what you can see is a world that, in a way, really does look a lot like Earth. But it's an Earth not of the British countryside or of someplace with canals, but rather of a desert environment. In the lower left here is a photograph of the Painted Desert in Arizona, which was just downhill from Lowell Observatory, where Percival Lowell did all of his observations. And in fact, those photographs that NASA has taken of Mars that we now know of today that have really created this popular idea of what Mars is like, which is very much like a desert environment, like the American Southwest, come to us from these rovers. And part of our ability to analyze those photographs, to color balance them, comes from a little color calibration target that sits on Spirit, Opportunity, and Curiosity. And you can see that on the solar panel for, in this case, Spirit in the lower right-hand corner. Here's a couple of photographs, one in the laboratory and one sitting on Mars, of these color calibration targets, which are actual pieces of art. They were a project that I was very fortunate to be able to work with scientists at Cornell, NASA, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And these calibration targets are a little plaque with different colors of gray, and a post that casts a shadow. So as sunlight from the Martian atmosphere falls on these little objects, we know what color they should be in the laboratory, so we can look at them on Mars and figure out what color they should be there, and therefore calibrate our photographs correctly. But they are pieces of art. So we human beings have actually now sent art to other planets. And through the calibration of those photographs, we now do realize that when you go to a desert environment, in fact, you could be on Mars. I have gone to Utah, the red rock deserts of Utah in the American Southwest, and in walking through that countryside that is famous from American Western films, you can actually imagine what it might be like to walk across the surface of Mars. Well, the Earth is a planet, and that is one of the things that our spacecraft and our exploration of the solar system has produced. In learning that planets like Mars are, in fact, possibly Earth-like in some aspects, we learn about our planet in a global context. And this is another way in which art, here we have two photographs of the Earth itself, one taken from Apollo 8, Earthrise, another from Apollo 17 that shows the entire globe of the Earth. These two photographs that came about in the late 60s, early 70s are famous today. And there are those who have written that these two photographs in some way have spurred and been an inspiration for the environmental movement that has come about since then. It's no there's no controversy over the fact that the full Earth picture on the right is the most seen photo of our own planet. And so in many ways, this science and space exploration has helped drive this idea of our planet as a precious place to be preserved. And this preservation, this conservation has actually a rich history in the United States when it comes to art. Thomas Moran, a painter back in the 1860s, 1870s, was sent on one of the first expeditions out to the American West to see this new territory that was new to European eyes. And the expedition that he went upon went to the Yellowstone area of what is today Wyoming. The paintings that he created of in this case, the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, when he returned, hung in the United States Capitol and was instrumental in some ways for creating not just the United States' first national park, but the world's first national park. And years later, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, the American government had a program to get people to go out and see these national parks, to spend money, to drive tourism and help the economy. In the post-war years, the American photographer Ansel Adams was hired by the Department of the Interior of the United States to go and photograph these same places. So again, here's Old Faithful. Well, today we are seeing a new type of technology that has come about, which is not just photography. And I'll point out, in those post-war years, Americans had cameras that they took everywhere. And so as they saw these Ansel Adams photographs, they thought, oh, I could photograph that too. And in fact, they did. Well, today we have new technology, new camera technology that's come along in the last 20 years, the digital cameras. And these digital cameras have become sensitive enough that people are able to photograph many of these same landscapes, but not just by day, but by night as well. And so here you see the Milky Way rising over that same Old Faithful geyser in Yellowstone National Park. And it's amazing that this is happening at exactly the same time that the lights of our civilization worldwide are beginning to threaten those views of the night skies. And here we can see a composite of images of the Earth taken at night, and you see the lights of our civilization. These are the city lights, our lights of our homes. These are lights of also oil refineries, of fishing fleets, of clear-cutting burns. And in every single instance, this is light, not just shining on the ground that keeps us safe or does all these things that you think light should be good for, but rather light shining upward to illuminate the camera on a spacecraft in orbit around our planet. Well, in the United States, one of the things that has really become clear over the last 20 years is that many of the places that are free from this light pollution happen to coincide with where America's national parks are in fact found. And there's a photograph of Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah, and you can see the Milky Way overhead. And in fact, these are the places today that most people in the United States see the Milky Way, a pristine sky, the way human beings had seen the sky for really all of humanity up until really the last 100 or so years. And this has led to a new initiative here in the United States. And it's something that's modeled after that same governmental program by the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s during the Great Depression, this See America campaign to get people to go out to those parks. Today, we have a new initiative, not just See America, but See the Milky Way. And see the Milky Way in America's national parks. And starting about 10 years ago, I started creating these posters for various national parks around the United States. And it's where I coined the phrase, half the park is after dark, to really emphasize that once the sun goes down, don't just go back to your lodge, don't go back to your campsite, but really go out and see that other half of the natural world on display, the natural world overhead. And with my camera, I went out and began photographing some of these places. And some of these photographs have wound up in magazines, newspapers, cover of my book. But these photographs and the photographs of everyone worldwide who are now traveling to these dark places to record these night sky views have helped drive an increased interest in seeing the Milky Way. When you take a look online at pictures of national parks worldwide, just do a Google search on the name of any national park that you might be interested in, say Mayo. And one of the things you find is that a night sky picture is always one of the top photographs that comes up. Here's Glacier National Park in the United States, on the continental divide here in the Western US. And the poster that came out as a result of it. During these last 20 years, there's been a sea change in how American national parks, the National Park Service, see the role of the night sky in conservation. When I first began working with the national parks in 2007, I spent an entire year traveling from park to park. I visited about 14 of these different national parks over the course of 14 months. I lived in each of them for about 3 to 4 weeks. And I still remember going to one of these parks, which shall remain nameless. And when I told the superintendent there that I was an astronomer and I was coming to visit and learn about the night sky and astronomy in his park, I distinctly remember him saying, "Well, what does the night sky have to do with my park?" He was very skeptical. Well, I have had no superintendent tell me that recently. What I have had is in Grand Canyon National Park, when I met the superintendent, I had him shake my hand and say, "Oh, I am so glad you astronomers are here. You know, half the park is after dark." So it has made its inroads into our understanding of what conservation means. And this is one of the things that the International Dark Sky Association has been doing since, well, for decades, really. But over these last 15 years, this idea of dark sky places, international dark sky parks, has really come about. And the first one of those was here in the United States in southern Utah. Natural Bridges National Monument in 2007 was declared the world's first international dark sky park. And when you go there and you stand underneath one of those sandstone arches, you can look around, and the brightest thing in the sky is not the light over the campground or the distant glow of a city, but rather the center of our Milky Way. And when you live in a place like that, you cannot help but pay attention to it. And so it reminds me of those people who first painted those figures in the Lascaux caves, because by night, which is honestly half the day, there is nothing to do but look at this wonderful interplay of light, mysterious light, beautiful light, as it moves overhead, as it changes with the hours and changes with the days over the course of a year. And that is why we have grown to create constellations and tell stories. We see this, an entire record of morality, history, of when to plant, when to harvest. Every aspect of our lives has something to do ultimately with the night sky. So preserving that is not just a scientific thing for astronomers, it's a cultural thing, it's a historical thing, it's a humanitarian thing. we should all be able to see the sky. And here we have a map of where these dark sky reserves and parks can now be found. In fact, they're found all over the world, in the eastern and western hemispheres, in the northern hemisphere, and in the south. People today who still are lucky enough to live in places where you can see the Milky Way every moonless night are proud of what they can see. And I've had so many of them come up to me and say, how can we declare our park to be a dark sky park or a dark sky preserve or a dark sky place? I'll point out Natural Bridges had very few visitors back in 2007. But when I went back there in 2017, the park rangers told me, this is what we are now known for. People come expressly to see the night sky. So today, when we look at places, not just in the United States, but around the world, in those remote places, those places that are still fortunate enough to have a beautiful natural setting, the very fact that they are a natural setting by day has preserved in many of them the natural views overhead as well. And so it's one of the reasons for why I have been very proud to work with the folks at Mayo in the Mayo Dark Sky Park, because here's a wonderful photo from Brian Wilson showing the views out there in Western Ireland. And it is clear that when you go on a moonless night and you see the Milky Way, this single largest expression of us being part of a world larger than ourselves, a universe in which we are a part, it brings a sense of awe to us. And when we feel awe, psychologists have recently declared in a number of studies that this sense of awe actually makes us better people. It makes us feel, in some senses, smaller, but not small in a bad way, small in a sense of that we are not the most important part of the universe, that rather we are part of something larger than ourselves. And in feeling that, we feel a connection, not just with the universe, but with one another. So seeing a starlit sky, a Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon, makes us better people. And in being better people, more aware of the world around us, we are perhaps inclined to treat that world better than maybe it has been treated before. So when I was approached by the folks at Mayo to create a poster for them, I was touched. I was honored. This would be my first opportunity to design a travel poster, a dark sky poster for a park outside of North America. And so to display it here, to reveal it for the first time, we want to show that Ireland's first international dark sky park is a place for everyone to come and see the universe the way, well, all of humanity deserves to be able to see it. And I am so glad that there are places, not just in the United States, not just in very rural deserts, but places that anyone can come and travel and see that natural world on display, both beneath and above the horizon. So I want to thank you for including me in this festival. And I am so glad that even in the midst of this pandemic, I could still join you and be there in Ireland, if not in fact, at least in spirit. And so thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Just looking at the chat comments coming in there about the poster, people are really, really impressed with it. So well done. I know myself and Georgia worked with you on it, and we were really delighted with it. So so happy to see that everybody thinks it's so beautiful. And what really stood out to me about your talk is, I think, some of what you were recounting about you know, your work in the US and some of the initial feedback you were getting. I don't think it's been too different here in Ireland. Now we're coming a little later to the game, but I'd imagine Georgia would have similar stories to tell. And of course, Georgia is a dark sky defender like yourself. And she's really been instrumental in getting the first dark sky park in Ireland, and she might be a little bit modest. So I always like to remind everybody about how wonderful our Georgia is in getting our dark sky park recognized, because it's always been there, but it's just getting the recognition. And I think it's also opened up a new kind of a view from our visitors about what our national park is about as well, as probably one of the last remaining wildernesses in Ireland, just because of the remote nature of it. So we hope to continue protecting the dark skies above the national park. So we've had a few questions in here and a couple of comments. I don't know, can I keep up with the comments in the chat? But we'll go to the questions first. So we've got a question from Emer McCarthy, and she wants to know what are Tyler's thoughts on finding water on Mars in recent days, please. And she's loving the talk.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So yes, so water's been found on Mars. And in fact, water's just recently been found on the moon as well. And one of the things this shows us is that these places, the forces that created the Earth are the same forces that created the moon and Mars, other planets. And this implies that someday when we human beings travel to the moon and Mars, there may in fact be water there. We need water to live. Water is hydrogen and oxygen. If you split it apart, you get oxygen, which you can breathe. And you can also get energy from that. So these are all wonderful resources for human exploration. But water on Mars is also a fantastic discovery, because every place that there is liquid water here on the Earth, there is also life. And so if what you're interested in, and I think back to Percival Lowell and his canals, if what you are interested in knowing is how life-bearing is Mars, is there in fact life on Mars, how prevalent might life be in the universe, you look for the places with water. And one of NASA's goals is to follow the water. And so, in fact, my wife is a NASA scientist who is on the Europa Clipper mission, which will eventually send a spacecraft to orbit Jupiter's moon, Europa, which is where we think there may actually be an entire sea of liquid water. And if so, then my bet is there's fish. There is some sort of critters swimming about on that moon of Jupiter.
Lovely. I look forward to the day they find those fish. So moving more to the kind of art side of your work, I just wanted to make note of Friedel Pass from Belgium has been with us all day, and he's been making some really great comments in the chat. And he was saying how one of the most important arguments he thinks against light pollution is, I guess, the inspiration that people have drawn from the starry skies. And I saw a comment, I'm not sure who made it, about, imagine if we didn't have, the paintings by Van Gogh looking at those starry skies. And then Terry Mosley has asked a question related to that as well. He said, first of all, a first-class presentation, but he wants to know which is more important to you, the artistic effect or the scientific accuracy, which is a great question, I think.
So my training is in astronomy. I have a Ph.D. in astronomy from Cornell University. And so when I approach artwork, say, for instance, the Mayo Dark Sky Park poster, I spent a lot of time looking around on Google Earth at various places and features within the park, and then trying to identify, all right, what might actually be on display there? And so what direction are you looking? Where would the Milky Way be? And in fact, I sat down for this poster and determined what time of night in July might this view be actually visible. And unfortunately, I didn't imagine anybody would ask me, so I don't remember exactly what time of night it is right now. But I knew that if I was going to draw this, I wanted you to be able to see it. And so this is possible. So I do try to stick, but for instance, I'll point out that it's not as if I went through and all those little stars are exactly the stars of exactly the right brightness that are in each of those directions. That's just too cumbersome, and I don't think anybody would really care. But I endeavor to be honest to the spirit.
Yeah, I think that's a very appropriate answer. People are looking to see where they can buy the poster, of course, on your website.
Mhm.
Um, and it was actually Jed Dowling that had mentioned about Van Gogh. So he's just mentioned another comment there about the importance of the art and science together. And I think that's all of the questions, unless I'm missing something. I know George is there in the background, and she may have had some other questions that I've missed in the chat because there was a lot going on there. So I'm sure she'll come in if there are any other questions. No?
Have we covered everything?
Okay, great. Yeah, there was just a lot of activity there on the chat towards the end.
There is. I've just popped up the website tyler.nordgren.com for anyone that's looking for Tyler's posters. So there's a huge collection there as well as Mayo. They're fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Tyler.
Sure.
Yeah. And then another, I think I just forgot to mention it there. There was Laura Harrison came in, and I think she's doing work or a PhD on dark sky parks. And she mentioned that there are quite a few people doing PhDs on dark sky parks. Some of them have been have visited us before. So it's great to see, you know, that interest in dark sky parks and, you know, people doing research on, you know, that. I guess it highlights how important our dark sky parks are becoming.
Dark sky studies is an emerging field in a number of places. I know that the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States, has a dark sky studies program that has just come out. I believe there may also be one in I'm thinking Cambridge, but I may have that one wrong. But this is something that more and more people, more and more places realize it's an interdisciplinary, it's a transdisciplinary field that calls on history, art, science, religion, anthropology, environmentalism. And so I think this is going to be something that's going to be very popular, very exciting in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And sorry, Laura's just come back there to say her PhD is on darkness rather than parks. So sorry, Laura.
Okay.
She just wanted to clarify that. But thanks again so much, Tyler, for joining us and for creating your masterpiece, Mayo Dark Sky Park. And we've loved having you. So thanks again.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you so much.